Hello and welcome to another episode of No Such Thing as a Fish, a weekly podcast coming to you from the QI offices in Covent Garden. My name is Dan Schreiber. I'm sitting here with Ann Miller, James Harkin, and Anna Chazinski. And once again, we have gathered around the microphones with our 4 favorite facts from the last 7 days. And in no particular order, here we go. Starting with you, James Harkin.
Okay, my fact this week is that the Very Hungry Caterpillar was originally called A Week with Willy the Worm.
Nice.
Quite a different book, that sounds like.
Yeah, how similar was it to the story about a caterpillar?
Well, it was a different ending, but it was a
The
similar...
worm didn't turn into a butterfly.
No, the worm didn't turn into a butterfly. The book was written by a guy called Eric Carle, and he was inspired by a hole punch. He noticed that the hole was going through some paper, and he thought, what if I turn this into a book? And so he thought, well, I could do a bookworm that goes through the holes. And so that's why it was called Willy the Bookworm. And then I think it was his publisher came up to him and said, well, why don't you change it instead of a worm into a caterpillar? And he thought, aha, caterpillars turn into butterflies. Spoiler alert, I could do that at the end of my book.
Okay. Do we know, was it going to be like Monday, Willy the Worm goes to the shops, Tuesday stays in bed all day? It just seems, I don't know why you spend a week with Willy the Worm.
This is the worst Craig David song I've ever heard.
There are some quite traumatizing children's books out there. There's one that's like about the journey of a sperm, which is really popular at the moment. I can't remember what the sperm's
Is it called
called.
Where Willy Went?
I think it is, which is actually very misleading, calling it Willy. I think that is going to confuse a lot of children.
I saw a picture of that book, Where Willy Went. It's called The Big Story of a Little Sperm. And on the front cover it says, the best story of its sort, the Daily Mail. So it's like, this is the best children's book about sperm.
In the genre,
Is out
children's
there.
sperm books.
Last year's best-selling UK child's author.
David Williams?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He made 7 million last year of book sales.
£7 million.
Yes.
If you need to get out of the podcasting game and into the children's books game.
Yeah. So his books get something like 600,000 sales each. Like he's got about 8 books. It's ridiculous.
Wow.
So I didn't look into books because I'm bored of them. I don't read.
You've had enough of books.
I just looked at worms.
Oh yeah.
Anyone
What have you
else
got?
interested in worms?
Yeah, definitely.
So have you ever tried worm fiddling?
No. What's that?
Worm
Or
charming?
Worm charming, worm fiddling, and worm grunting are all very similar. So worms, I don't think we know why, but when you create vibrations in the ground, then worms come up to the surface. And so the way you worm fiddle or you worm grunt, which is like getting worms up to the surface, is by making vibrations in the ground. And they think it might be because moles, when they're coming to attack worms, they burrow towards them, make vibrations, so they come up.
Another theory is that they think it's rain coming down.
Yeah.
And so they're going out so that they don't drown.
Yeah.
But you think on the other end, whenever a tractor like ploughs the field, that's a vibration, so the worms get exposed, but then they get eaten by all those birds that are always following.
Exactly, and the birds are extremely good at it. Like the seagull dance that you often see them doing, where they bounce around on the floor a little bit.
Go
That's
on.
to get the worms to come up. But so worm grunting, charming, fiddling, whatever, is kind of a competitive sport.
Amazing.
And the person who holds the record for it is a 10-year-old girl who set it in 2009 in Cheshire. And she brought up 567 worms
Wow.
out of
That
the
is
ground
amazing.
That's so cool.
in this little portion of land.
There was one year, I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago at the World Worm Charming, where no one got a single worm in the entire group of charmers.
Well, maybe that's why they've got more imaginative in how to get them up. Apparently, in the competition that this girl won, techniques to get the worms up included a man who strummed rock tunes on his guitar, a woman who tap danced to the theme from Star Wars, and a man who played the xylophones with bottles. None of whom actually won, but it does sound like a really entertaining event.
And what did she do again?
She just did the common way is you tap the ground with sort of a
So
stick.
she just went classic on it.
She went classic.
I had a wee look at Eric Carle's website and his frequently asked questions.
Oh,
Do you want to guess what one of his frequently asked questions about the hungry caterpillar is? What's the one problem with the hungry caterpillar? It's that it comes out of a cocoon, not a chrysalis.
Okay.
So usually butterflies come from chrysalises, but there is one called the Parnassian that comes in a cocoon. So if everyone's quibbling,
I bet that was a good
it is
Google
okay.
find
A
when
good
he
Google find.
frantically looked to how he could...
Yeah, they live in Siberia.
Right. No, actually,
quite
I
fair.
based it on a Siberian caterpillar.
But he also says, and here's my unscientific explanation. My caterpillar is very unusual. Caterpillars don't eat lollipops and ice cream, so you won't find my caterpillar in any field guides.
Right.
Fair
Fucked
point.
up, right?
Yeah.
I fucked up. I should have said that. I said this. Just leave it. For
Yeah.
fuck's sake.
No, there are kids on his website, James. Such an angry man.
He's so angry, isn't he?
He is
Such an angry author.
he is a national treasure and beloved by children.
Yeah, but he's got to curb the language. It's not appropriate for an FAQ on your own website.
Can I just quickly tell you about one really terrifying worm? I know I keep on trying to rebound this conversation back to worms. But there is this worm called the bobbit worm, which lives on the bottom of the ocean.
Oh, is he named after Lorena Bobbitt?
I don't know who that is. Is that some
Oh,
reference from the
is it-
50s, James?
No,
is
it's not.
Is it John Wayne Bobbitt?
Yeah,
who it's
so
been named
Lorena
after?
Bobbitt was John Wayne Bobbitt's wife.
Yeah.
Who chops off his penis.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Maybe he's named after a decapitated penis. Was it by any chance a 10-foot long penis?
Well,
Not by the time she cut it off.
It is 10 foot long. It lives on the bottom of the ocean, and it lives under the sand at the bottom of the ocean. And then when prey comes past, it pops up and snaps its jaws down so fast that it can cut fish straight in half.
wow.
And then it sucks them. So if you're cut in half, you're dead already, which is good for you. And if you're not, it sucks you down into the sand, under sand, and eats you. I just think a 10-foot long worm that can cut fish in half is a pretty cool worm.
I have a more scary worm than that, even, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
This is a colonoscopy performing robot
No.
that
Wow.
moves through your body in the same way that an earthworm moves.
Well, as in they've actually made the movement of it
Yeah.
to mimic it.
To mimic an earthworm.
Wow.
That's quite scary,
Is
isn't
there
it?
any reason they're sending robots into my body? Or
Yeah, it's
Everyday
medical purposes.
use.
It's not an Ann Summers product.
The 10-foot run, no.
will be? Give it a year. I like this. I clicked on the Mongolian death worm, which I think we've discussed before.
Cool
We
name.
have, by the way, interesting fact.
Oh,
I was going to
God.
mention it, but Andy has banned me from ever talking about the Mongolian death worm.
Here's your chance. He's not here.
I've used it like 3 times. For listeners who haven't heard it, it's a worm from Mongolia that shoots lightning bolts out of its anus.
A disgusting creature that fires lightning out of its anus. Andy Murray will be back next week.
Yeah. We should move on soon, shouldn't we?
Oh, should we? Okay.
Oh, we can do more worms. I've got a few more kid book things. One's a question, which is J.K. Rowling has said that she regrets killing one character from Harry Potter. I want to see if anyone can guess.
Is it Harry Potter?
Um,
Does he die?
James.
It's so I can't answer that for spoiler alert reasons. And I actually didn't write down his name, but he's a random ice cream man, right?
Florian Fortescue.
Right. So yeah, it's just a total random character, but it's because it was a senseless killing. She didn't bring it back into the story in any way. She didn't justify the killing for any reason. She just had him killed.
She was just having a bad day.
Yeah,
Someone had written into her website saying,
This
your
was-
wizards aren't actually technically wizards. And she just lost it.
Okay, time for fact number 2, and that is Anne.
My fact is that in World War II, the 20 Committee was in charge of turning German spies. In Roman numerals, that made them the XX Committee or the Double Cross Committee.
Okay.
Which basically means at peak wartime, someone thought, you know what's good here? A pun.
Yeah.
Did they do it on purpose then?
I'm not. So I heard this. I went to Bletchley Park the other week, and I got told this on the walking tour, which is brilliant. But I have read recently that they were double crossed first, and then changed it to 20 after. So either way, it's the double cross pun, and then 20 for making it less obvious. But it was hiding in plain sight.
And is there 1 to 19?
I don't know. I like to think there just was 20 when someone said that works. I don't know about 1 to 19 actually.
I think I know the guy who oversaw it was this guy called Tar Robertson, who was the MI5 agent who overlooked it, and he will have done it on purpose because so wartime rules dictated that spy code names couldn't have a hint of the person's actual identity in them, and he disregarded these rules completely and made his own rule that every single spy name had to be a pun, a hint as to his actual name or a joke.
Amazing. What was he called?
He was called Tar Robertson, actually, and I don't think he gave himself. I think he gave himself a perfectly impossible to uncover name. But so it was like Dusko Popov was his second in command, and he called him Scoot because he
Pop off. Nice.
Although he then later changed his code name to Tricycle because he was known for having threesomes.
I have Tricycle. I have that Arthur Owens was one of the first agents they turned on this, and his codename was Snow, which is most of the letters of his surname.
Yes, yeah.
But he was great because he was one of the first to work for this committee, and he was very useful because the Abwehr, the Germans, used him as their meet and greet for new agents arriving in Britain. So everyone that came in to spy for them went through him. He was reporting
Right.
to MI5, so he could just let them know what was going on.
So just to give this a bit more context, this is World War II. Bletchley Park had set up. They were trying to sort of get a lot of tricks over on the Germans, and a lot of German agents were coming into Britain. and immediately either being caught or giving themselves up,
Yeah.
and then acting as double agents and
So-
going back to Germany or sending messages back.
To report back.
And it was a huge part of the war. I mean,
Yeah.
it led to some of the biggest moments in the war, like the D-Day.
Yeah.
The D-Day justified it. I have read one really good book extract, which is basically saying this was this ridiculous sideshow with these idiots playing spy games for the whole war, mostly pointless. And the only reason we now look back on them with this like air of God, they saved us, is
Because it
because
worked.
of D-Day. Like there was one instance where we tried to persuade the Germans that we were going to be attacking the French coast at a certain place, and so we sent out all these secret radio signals hoping they'd pick them up and stuff, and they'd get all their troops there, and then we sent some dummy boats out towards the French coast, so it seemed like we were going to attack, and they hadn't picked up on any of these things we'd planted in their radio waves, so we just like spent ridiculous amounts of money and effort on absolutely nothing.
One of my favourite double agents was a guy who was codenamed Garbo. So he was a guy called Joao Pujol Garcia from Barcelona. He was anti-communist, anti-Nazi, and wanted to work for the British. But he thought he'd be more helpful if he was already a German spy. So he got himself recruited by telling them he had a visa and was going to England anyway. Didn't have the visa. So he would spend all his time in Lisbon Library making up stuff about his spy network and research lines, including things like, there are in Glasgow men who will do anything for a litre of wine. And his reports were so accurate.
That was a lie, was it?
That was his impression from Lisbon of what life in Britain was like. But his reports were so accurate, MI5 got really worried and started hunting for this mole in the UK because they thought stuff was getting out. He was just making it all up. And then in the end, he managed to get recruited by Britain, came over here to spy, told the Germans he had 24 spies, this big network, and because it was backed up by the British, whenever he killed someone off, they put their obituary in the paper so it would look legit to the Germans.
Right.
As on D-Day, he was telling his contacts to stand by for an important message to distracting them from what was actually happening. And they never found out when he got honours after the war for his efforts by the Germans.
I didn't know that thing about all the names had to be a slight pun, and I've got a big list of names of some of the spies.
And is it all falling into place now?
Slightly. I mean, you got to sort of know what they did. Like, I don't know what Biscuit did.
Ate a lot of snacks.
I can presume what the spy Careless did.
Got fired.
Yeah. Freak. Not sure what he did. Gander.
Oh, I can tell you Gander.
Yeah?
Gander was just Kurt Goose. Which I would have been so annoyed if I was called
Gander.
Kurt Goose and my boss said, I'm going to give you the code name Gander. I think I'd be saying, do you mind giving me a slightly less obvious code name?
Yeah. Well, how about this one? Sniper.
I wonder if the idea is because, like, in those days there would have been a stereotype that Germans don't have a sense of humour, probably. And they thought by doing puns, they'll never get these puns because Germans don't have a sense of
I
humour.
bet they had that chat
yeah,
in the
yeah.
MI5 HQ.
Mullet. I'm going to guess that one's hair-based.
Well, the word mullet about hair only dates back to the 1980s. That was the earliest anyone's ever found it is in a song by the Beastie Boys. And no one's ever found an earlier use of the word mullet.
So Beastie Boys technically coined mullet.
Yeah, actually, it might even
But
be
there was-
90s.
So the first German spies who came over were ill-prepared, right? They couldn't speak any English, a lot of them, or spoke really bad English, to the extent that MI5 thought that they were joking, thought that they were lying, and used to interrogate them and say, obviously, Germany wouldn't be stupid enough to send a spy who could not speak any English. But yeah, isn't that bizarre?
Yeah. So with Bletchley, when they set this up, the way that they started recruiting people was through a crossword that they put out in the papers, and they set a challenge saying, if people think that they can do a crossword within 12 minutes, come and take this challenge. So people came and they did the challenge, and after they won, they would then recontacted saying, listen, you managed to do this, why don't we get you to work at Bletchley? And they reprinted the crossword. You can try the crossword and see if you can do it in 12 minutes. Yeah.
I send off crosswords to the Sunday Times and Telegraph when I've done them, and I do it in the secret hope that one day I am going to get a phone call that one. I mean, they do invite you to send them off to win a fountain pen. It's not like I'm just sending unsolicited post every week.
How many pens do you have now?
to Telegraph? I've never won a pen. I won a notebook.
I've never once successfully got the clue to a crossword right, ever.
What, a
And
cryptic?
I have any crossword, and I've
Just a
tried.
normal
I've
That's
tried.
exactly what a spy would say, though, wouldn't they? They'd be
I'm
like,
terrible.
I am so bad at crosswords, they
Yeah.
would never recruit me.
The day I find out Dan Schreiber is a spy is the day I book my ticket to Mars one way.
Well, here's another bit of evidence. He doesn't really speak very good English. Would a spy say Covent Garden?
Yeah.
It's so no one knows where we are. It's an act of genius.
Surname Schreiber, German surname.
What does that mean again?
Schreiber.
Writer.
Yeah.
Writer.
Writer.
Yeah, just saying. That's
And that was an ironic kind of pun, right? When they gave you that.
Yes.
This is all falling into place. There's this book called Double Cross, The True Story of D-Day Spies. It's by a guy called Ben McIntyre, and I would highly recommend it. It's full of really exciting spy stories.
Yeah, could I just say as well, he wrote a book called Agent Zigzag, one of the best non-fiction books I've read about spying.
Yeah.
It reads like an Indiana Jones novel based on one of these agents, Agent Zigzag.
Yeah, he's awesome. But so he tells this story about a spy called Gosta Caroli, who was a German spy who was parachuted into the Northamptonshire countryside. He got concussed because he had a bad landing, and he tried to sleep off his concussion in a ditch. A farmer saw his leg poking out, and so he was arrested. But then it was great being arrested as a spy in those days, because you'd immediately have the government going, well, do you want to just be a spy for us instead? So he was arrested and agreed to be a double agent for Britain. But he agreed at first, and then he sort of changed his mind and decided he was betraying the Nazis. So he was in a safe house in Cambridge, and he was given a minder, because double agents had minders to check they weren't going rogue. And he crept up behind his minder while he was playing Patience and tried to throttle him with a piece of rope. When this didn't work, he apologised, tied him to a chair, and ran off with a tin of pilchards, a pineapple, and a large canvas canoe. Then he stole a motorbike and rode towards the coast with the canoe balanced on his head, with the plan to row to Holland. He fell off the motorbike, unsurprisingly, I guess, and then he approached a passing man and asked him to help him dispose of his canoe over a hedge, at which point, when the man had helped him do that, this man called the police and said, a guy with a German accent on a motorbike and a canoe on his head just asked me to help him dispose of his canoe. Does that sound right? And then the quote from this book was, clearly unfit for double agent work. He spent the rest of the war in prison.
I like to think that if he'd have gotten to the coast, he would have got in his canoe and put the motorbike on his head and rode across it.
Yeah. This, I feel like you've told me this before, Anne, but I don't think it's been on our show, which is that at one point when Bletchley was going on, Agatha Christie, so she got investigated. Do you want to tell the story? It's really interesting. Well, so Agatha Christie had a friend who actually worked at Bletchley, who was very much a part of the Enigma code cracking team. And she released a book called N or M, and in it, there's a character called Major Bletchley. And everyone got really worried that this guy, Dilly Knox, his name was leaking information about Bletchley to Agatha Christie. And it turns out that what happened was she was on a train heading back to London from Oxford, and it stopped for ages at Bletchley. And she got so annoyed by being stopped in the delay that she said, I'm going to name the worst character in my book after this crappy town that we've been stuck in. And so it was just a total coincidence.
Bletchley isn't on the way from Oxford to London.
No. She's a spy. She's obviously
It's
a spy.
an elaborate
That's the
cover-up.
crappiest excuse ever, and I can't believe James and I are the first ones to spot that Bletchley's Did she mean Reading? All the spies were in Reading Park, and we've just been mishearing this all these years. Just a couple of things on punning.
Yep.
Always.
There's obviously a pun in the name. So there's a pun in the book of Genesis.
Ooh,
First
what
book
is
of the
it?
Bible. Problem is that puns that are written in different languages aren't very good to repeat on this podcast because we can't get them unless I explain the language to you. But so it's that the word for cunning, which describes the serpent, is very similar to the word for naked. So the words are arum and aramim. And so I think the idea is maybe that it's a pun saying that the serpent is very close with its evil, is actually very close to these naked people who are about to be evil. Or so that's very, very funny
Wouldn't
from the
open
Bible.
with it, yet they did. Okay, time for fact number 3, and that is Chazinski.
My fact this week is that houses in Bali are built in proportion to the owner's body.
That's
And
incredible.
It's so cool.
But what does it mean?
How
I
does
don't
that
actually
work?
know what it means.
I mean, if you have a big head, they do a big roof or something.
It's kind of like that, except it's not quite laid out like that. You obviously haven't spoken to Balinese architects, but it's similar.
Hang your head in shame, James.
So they employ a special kind of architect who's called an undagi. And the first thing he does when you employ him to come and build your household is he measures all your body parts and works out, and by those measurements, he can work out what shape and size to make the house. So he'll measure different parts of the head. He measures the distance from the elbow to the fingers, I think, the width of the fist, the length of the index finger, the width of the little finger, and all these measurements determine the size of the compound and the dimensions inside of like pavilions, and the spacing of different pillars, and the width of the beds even is determined by, the width of a fingernail or whatever. It's so weird.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
That's
it's really
very
cool. And there's a bit, so part of the house represents the head, and that's where the head of the family should stay because they think that the head is the most sacred part of the body, it's the best bit, and then the feet are where sort of the cows and the pig, if you own farm animals, the foot area of the house is where they stay, and then it's got an anus area, which is where the rubbish is. And which is where the anus of the house is.
Do they measure the size of your anus?
I believe they have to.
Wow.
Otherwise, you can't build a proper house.
That's amazing. I mean, I'm assuming that's not every single house in Bali. I've been to Bali and I've never seen the measurements.
No, it's traditional houses.
Because if you didn't know who had done that process and not, and you got to their house and you saw at the back there was a massive rubbish bit, but Mike's got a massive anus. I had no idea. Is he okay?
It's got 3 skips
Such
in
an
there.
enormous anus.
Yeah, I don't know if they do that.
Right.
I wonder if you'd be able to go to a house, measure all the rooms, and say, "Oh, this person must have slightly above average size head,
Yeah.
large anus, or whatever, large feet, so it's going to be Jeff or whatever."
Yeah. Or maybe if you take your girlfriend home, then she brings a tape measure and you find her measuring the sort of protruded extension at some point, and that's how you judge a man, isn't it?
What you mean? It's like, you know what they say about men with large areas for their pigs and cattle? Large
Huge feet.
protruding extension.
By the way, Jeff and Mike, not very Balinese names that we've picked for these examples, but Balinese names are really interesting. So I used to go to Bali a lot as a child because I grew up in Hong Kong. It was very close, and so we used to go a lot because Hong Kong being a concrete jungle, you sort of wanted to get away from the city, and that was a nice place that you could get to very easy. And the names there, so they're kind of given the same names. This is traditionally, so I don't want to speak as if everyone's got this, but Wayan is a name that I've known since childhood because everyone I've met there is called Wayan. It's the oldest. That's the first son is called Wayan. There's a few other options for that as well, but Wayan is the big one. Second-born names, Madi, and Wayan's for guys, by the way. Then you got the third-borns, the fourth-borns, and that's all that the list goes up to. So then if you have a fifth child, they just call it Wayan and then use the word for again in Balinese.
What?
So it's Wayan again.
So the name for a fourth child, the ones that Dan's just listed there have a few alternatives. So you can say Wayan, and then there are a couple of other synonyms that they say. So you can have one of 2 or 3 names. But if you're the fourth born, there's only one name. And I think that's because at the time the system was set up, they wanted to discourage people from having too many kids. So they were like, look, your fourth kid, you've only got one option for the name. And that option is Ketut, and it means little banana. As in the smallest banana at the end of the bunch. So every single fourth child is called Little Banana.
That's much sweeter.
That's
Do you remember
really
the thing we had about Victorian slang for the youngest child?
What was that?
Last shake of the bag.
Oh, yeah.
Nice one, Victorians.
This is completely off topic, but I was reading about it today. If you read any old kind of Guinness Book of Records, there's often the woman with most children. And she was Russian. She was from St. Petersburg. I can't remember her name. Valentina, maybe it was something. Maybe Valentina Vasiliev or something. Anyway, so she had 67 children, if I remember rightly.
Whoa.
A lot of them were triplets and, twins.
I bet she's got a big garbage dump, hasn't she? So sorry. Dan, come on. Come on, everyone. Yep, go on.
Yeah.
Valentina.
Yeah, but what I learned today is that her husband, after he left her and then went to another woman and had 18 children with her.
Wow.
But it's like 19th century, so I think we're not 100% sure if it's all true, but there are some contemporary reports about it.
Wow.
That's a lot.
So it's possible that everyone in St. Petersburg is descended from that one man.
That is...
That's the logical conclusion. So in Bali, they have sort of an inbuilt sense of direction. It's one of the first things you learn is your sense of direction. And anthropological accounts will say that if, like, a traditional Balinese person moves to a place where they're not sure about their orientation and they get really disoriented, then that can makes them feel really uncomfortable.
Do you mean like it's you always know which way is north kind of thing?
Always know which way is north, except if you go to Bali and you ask which way is north, sometimes they'll point south. Because
and these people have an extraordinary way of telling where's north.
Why do they point south?
So the reason they point south is actually because the equivalent north in Bali is actually just towards their biggest mountain. And the biggest mountain in Bali is right in the middle. and so it's not actually north, it's Kaja, but that's often translated in English as north. And most people live in the south of Bali, so Kaja is usually north.
Unless
but if you're in
north.
North Bali and they say Kaja, then they mean south towards the mountain.
Right.
And all of their orientation is based on towards the mountain or towards the sea.
Cool.
But I reckon if I had to point towards the largest feature in my island, I would be able to do that because it's a massive mountain. You just go, look, it's there.
Just stop doing down their innate sense of direction.
Well, you couldn't point to like Ben Nevis.
Yeah, they can't
from
all
here,
see
could
it.
we?
Or they can't all see it, although I did read
North?
something that said that Balinese people who live nearer other mountains use that mountain instead as north.
Is this Mount Agung?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So Mount Agung, it's twice the size of Ben Nevis.
Can you see it from everywhere? Like, can
I
you see
feel
that
like
on the
I feel like it was always there's obviously bits where you just go way too far and it's just whatever fog might take over or something like that. But yeah, it's that erupts quite. It used to erupt quite a lot. I remember as kids when we used to go past it, we were always really scared because they said, "Well, it's still active," and that's not what you want to hear.
Yeah.
And I asked my dad, "What would we do in the situation?" And he said, "Well, I'd grab your sister and run." And I'd be like, "What? What about me?" So, in the scenario of death, I was being left behind by my dad. That's why I learned that
At least
day.
he was honest with you.
Yeah. Should we move on?
Just on buildings related to body parts, quickly. China now, the Chinese government now has a ban on building eccentric buildings because people keep building buildings they consider embarrassing. One of them was built by a British company, and it's called the Pair of Pants. It's been called the Pair of Pants. It used to be called the Gate of the Orient building because it looks like a giant pair of trousers, and lots of people in the area complained. It's in Suzhou in China, and local bystanders are raging that it's just a big pair of pants as soon as the legs were joined together, and they say, I just feel like I'm humiliated as I walk under someone's crotch. And so the Chinese government said, look, no more embarrassing buildings.
Wow.
Yeah, shame.
They did a few years ago in South Sudan. Do you remember when they got their independence? They decided they were going to build all of their cities in the shape of animals.
Wow.
So they were going to move their capital from, the capital is Juba, I think. They were going to move it to a new city which was shaped like a giraffe or an elephant or something.
The city was shaped like a giraffe.
Yeah,
Really?
and they would put like the president's palace would be in the eye of the elephant or giraffe, and the waste disposal would be where the anus would be.
Cool.
And it's like the streets would be lit up.
But they
That's
never
cool.
did it because basically it would cost like £20 billion to do it, and the poorest country in the world, so they never did it. But
Yeah.
they thought it might get like tourists in and stuff.
I go to visit the giraffe town.
I don't know if you would if it was in the South Sudan.
I'd be tempted to pop in if I was ever going from Oxford to London.
Okay, time for our final fact of the show, and that is my fact. And my fact this week is that according to Isaac Newton, the world is going to end in 2060.
Okay.
And he knew a lot, so
He knew a
we
ton.
believe it.
No, okay, so we definitely shouldn't believe it. It's interesting that he just made that prediction, though. And because obviously we all know, if you've looked into Newton's life, that he was obviously this great scientist, but he also believed in a lot of, alchemy and mystical sort of stuff.
Crazy shit, as some
Crazy
people call
stuff,
it.
yeah. And he also, the Bible was one thing that he really loved analyzing, and this is where he got the date 2060 from. He was analyzing the Bible, and he was trying to work out when the end of the world would be, I think.
But didn't he say that 2060 is just the earliest that
Yes.
it might
Yeah.
end?
Yeah.
I think he said it may end later, but I see no reason for it ending sooner than 2060.
Yeah.
He also said it was to put a stop to the rash conjectures of fanciful men who are frequently predicting the time of the end, and by doing so bring the sacred prophecies into discredit as often as their predictions fail.
I should rephrase my fact. According to Isaac Newton, the world will end in 2060 or sometime in between then and the end of the universe.
Well, actually, no. I think the one of the leading Newton scholars, who's called Snoblen, has worked out exactly what he meant by it, and says he thought the world was going to end sometime between 2060 and 2344.
Okay.
So it's in that window.
Okay, that's a good
apparently.
window. Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was sort of rough scribblings, wasn't it? It wasn't really ever meant to be published. He scribbled it on the back of an envelope, literally,
Yeah.
I think. And it might have just been to put off, as Anne says, all of these scaremongers who kept on predicting the end of the world. And he really got very annoyed about that, all these prophecies that were saying the world's going to end. So he thought the way to counter that is for me to prophesise when the world's going to end.
But also need to put it way out of his own lifetime, so no one can say you were wrong.
Yeah, but so he was a truly interesting character.
Yeah.
for outside of his work in science. Interestingly, his most famous work, which I find hard to say, Principia, almost didn't get published.
How come?
Because a book just before it that was published was called History of Fishes, or Historia Passeum, and it bankrupted basically the whole of the world, and as a result,
Wait, go
they
back,
couldn't
go
afford
back.
to publish another book.
It bankrupted the whole world.
And somehow the world pulled the cash together.
Yeah, and they got the money together eventually, and so it was published. So, yep.
What do you actually mean by
No,
that?
it's to
Do
do
you
with the
know?
Royal Society, yeah. So they had funding for publishing books, and they thought this book on fishes was going to be massive, and it tanked. No one bought it. So it basically delayed the publication of Principia, so they weren't able to do it. And then Edmund Halley stood in, and he said that I think this book should be published, and he even put in some of his own money, and so it was eventually published in 1687. But there was a point where it wasn't going to be published because of the situation that they were in.
That's really
cool.
interesting.
Yeah.
I have another Royal Society bit, which is that there was a bit of... Well, today it's generally accepted that both Newton and Leibniz came up with calculus independently. But there was a while when it was sort of... They set up, basically, the Royal Society in 1713 set up a committee to decide once for all who'd done it, and they found that it was Newton. Chair of the committee?
Newton.
I think it was me, you'll find.
But he had a lot of professional rivalries. Really bitter one with Hook.
Hook is the one I remember.
Hook's his main one, and actually,
God, Hook, he gets everywhere. Peter Pan, he pisses off.
Newton.
That's a bad guy.
The crocodile.
I think Hook might be the good guy. No, it's hard to say who's the good guy in this.
I think they're both not very good guys, actually.
Yeah. Okay. So he had this dispute with Hook, and it was about when he came up with his theory of gravity. And Hook said that actually Newton got part of this idea from me about how gravity decreases.
The inverse square law.
The inverse square law, precisely.
Don't explain that. We all know what that means.
Dan and I are fine.
Don't want to patronise anyone. And yeah, Newton just wrote this letter saying he had absolutely nothing to do with it, and I don't need to include him in my book. But there is a theory that, you know, the quote that Newton is most famous for saying, which is...
Your mama's so fat that if it was
Your mum is so fat that the gravity decreases by the inverse of the square of the distance as I move away from her.
Was that it?
Sorry, guys. His most famous quote is, "If I have seen further, it is standing on the shoulders of giants."
Yeah.
So, and he wrote that to Robert Hooke in a letter where he was saying, you know, it's been a real help having you guys around. If I've seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. Some people believe actually this was just a jibe at Hooke because Hooke had quite a serious back problem, which caused him to have a really massive hunch. And so some people have now
He's saying,
speculated.
you look like a stepladder. No? I don't get it. What's the jibe?
So he's thanking the giants, but not Hook because he's too small.
He's
Yeah.
small.
Yeah, you're not one of those giants. Yeah, not like it's nice that you're bending over so I can climb onto your shoulders.
I found a list. Have you guys read this list that he wrote when he was about 20 years old?
Yes, I love
It's
it.
incredible.
His
It's
sins.
It's such an insight.
What
His
ones?
sins.
Oh,
A
sins.
list of his
What are your
sins.
favourite ones? My favourite is threatening my father and mother Smith to burn them in the house over them.
Yeah. That's pretty vicious.
The next one is wishing death and hoping it to some.
Wow.
Eating an apple at thy house. Probably the apple. He was,
Caught it, ate it.
Was that so? You're not allowed to eat an apple in church? Is
well,
that
I
the
guess
deal?
at the time.
So if you
Yeah.
focused on praying, not your belly.
24. Punching my sister.
25. Robbing my mother's box of plums and sugar.
Yeah.
Oh, is that some kind of weird euphemism?
No,
he
it's
ate
for
the
making
apple.
jam. Well, making jam is a euphemism, so...
There you go. People have speculated about his relationship with his mother. It was very difficult and twisted. A lot of people have Freudianly decided that he has mother issues, and that's why he remained a virgin his whole life, which he did, didn't he? And
yeah.
never really had an attachment to women because they think, and he hated his stepfather.
Oh, he didn't like his sister much because he punched her.
No, that was a sign of affection in the
is it?
17th century.
Playful
yeah.
punching.
Okay, going on to the end of the world.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a book called 88 Reasons the Rapture Will Be in 1988 by Edgar Weisant, which I really like. And on Amazon, there's some one-star reviews. In fact, there's only 2 reviews, and they're both one-star reviews. And one of the reviews is, really, it's impossible to give this a positive review, given that it exists entirely to preach that the rapture will be happening in 1988. As I recall, the rapture did not occur in 1988.
No.
But yeah, this guy, Edgar Weishaupt, was quite famous at the time. But obviously, in 1989, they realised that he was wrong. But then his next book was called Rapture Report 1989. And then he also wrote another one called 23 Reasons It Looks Like the End of the World Will Occur on Rosh Hashanah 1993. And another one called Earth's Destruction by Fire, Nuclear Bonfire, Prediction for 1994.
Is it an annual?
It is phenomenal though, how these people manage to, when it doesn't happen, to say, oh yeah, we just got the numbers wrong, and then the next time there's always a big fuss again. There's a new story and people panic. What I really like is this guy in New Hampshire who set up a business called Eternal Earthbound Pets, which will look after the pets. If you believe you're going to be raptured, you pay him to look after your pet, because the ones who stay behind can feed the cat. And he's told the Wall Street Journal that the people who pay him will be disappointed twice. Once because they weren't raptured, and again because I don't do refunds.
But actually, that he admitted that was a hoax a bit later on.
Oh no!
Well, it was because the state insurance department came after him and said, "Oh, you seem to be selling insurance, but you're not really registered to sell insurance, are you?" He said he's had no clients, never issued a certificate, and he's not taken a single dollar in the 3 years of its existence.
So the business isn't going well, sure. It is really interesting, though, that whole when the rapture when you've predicted the rapture comes and it doesn't, what do you do after that? And I think that was one of the spurs for psychological analysis of cognitive dissonance, which is the thing where you sort of adjust reality in your mind to suit what you've expected, because humans find it so hard to deal with facts that don't accord with what they thought was the truth. And so I think this was expanded in 1954 when Dorothy Martin said that she'd received news from the planet Clarion that a bunch of aliens were going to come down on a flying saucer and beam up everyone who, collected in a certain area. And she gathered quite a few followers, and on Christmas Eve they all went to this area to be beamed up by a flying saucer, and they sung some Christmas carols, and the flying saucer didn't come. And what she didn't realise was that her group had been infiltrated by this really famous psychologist called Festinger, who I think is the leading psychologist on cognitive dissonance, who was looking at how do you justify that? And they justified it by saying the aliens were so impressed at their sign of devotion that they decided not to destroy Earth after all.
Oh, that is a brilliant excuse.
Went away again. Yeah.
I saw a thing on Twitter about a while ago, which I loved, which is there was a dystopian futures book convention, and someone overheard someone saying, "Excuse me, is this the cue for the apocalypse?" One of the events. I just think it's so British.
Yeah.
Queuing for the apocalypse.
Newton used to give lectures to empty lecture theatres.
Did he?
Actually, someone's done a study on kind of the mentally what famous scientists are like. And that someone is Simon Baron-Cohen, who's a really famous neuroscientist, and he's also Sacha Baron Cohen's cousin. But this is looking into how they display signs of autism, and it seems like Newton found it really hard to connect to other people, and he gave really boring lectures. He didn't care about lecturing. He just wanted to be alone in his attic studying, so people tended not to go, and if no one went, he'd just give the lecture anyway to an empty room.
They've closed off the whole street and there's police on either side, and
really?
empty.
Yes.
And that's it for this week's episode. You'll notice our abrupt ending there. That was because Alex Bell came in to tell us that the entire road that we work on had been evacuated except for us, because we were busy making a podcast talking about the end of the world. So we had to leave the building immediately. Also, incidentally, at the same time, Mount Etna erupted. But that's it. That's our show. That's all of our facts. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to get in contact with any of us about the things we've said over the course of this podcast, we can be found on our Twitter accounts. I'm on @Schreiberland. Anne?
@Miller_Anne.
James?
@Eggshaped.
Jazinski.
You can email podcast@qi.com.
Yep, or you can find us at nosuchthingasafish.com, where all of our previous episodes are up and ready to be listened to. We'll see you again next week. Goodbye.